sure this goes on. Hi there, welcome to Findmypast Facebook Live. We're coming from Dublin in Ireland today, and I'm delighted to have with us one of Ireland's foremost genealogists, Fiona Fitzsimons, who's here beside me. Fiona has an exceptional career in Irish genealogy. She's really well known from doing thousands of research commissions, including presenting to President Obama's family quite some years ago now, and also touring around Ireland with Vice President Biden and his family, and delivering family history research to Tom Cruise in person and to Princess Charlene of Monaco, and loads more as well. But she's also done far more besides that. She's a researcher for the hit TV shows Who Do You Think You Are and for Finding Our Roots in PBS in the US. And she also writes for the online Irish magazine Irish Lives Remembered, which is free. You can get that online. And also the popular history magazine History Ireland. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Fiona. She's just come off doing another 2-year course in Trinity College, where she's teaching family and social history. So she's got lots to tell you, lots more than I will ever know about Irish genealogy. So I'll hand you over to Fiona now. Good luck.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. I think we lost a couple of minutes there in the initial start. We lost a video connection, so we had to start again. So I've actually heard that ringing endorsement, that introduction from Brian twice. Brian is incidentally my husband, so that's another thing that we have in common. I'm delighted that you can all join me today for the genealogy live session. We asked you to send in some pre-submitted questions, which we would answer in, I suppose, greater detail. And I'm also going to keep an eye on the chat box, and I'll try and answer questions live as they are sent in. I want to get this started because we have lost a little bit of time. So we are going to start with a question from Susan Bullee, or Bullee. Susan says, I'm stuck in the 1830s with my ancestors. I'm waiting for the Church of Ireland to put their records online and hoping they will have the answers. She asks, are there any other records besides the hearth money rolls and the tithe allotments I should be looking at? Her family are in County Antrim. Well, Susan, you're absolutely right. The representative church body library, the Church of Ireland records, are currently being prepared for digitisation. We haven't unfortunately got any completion dates of the project, so it could be in a year's time, it could be in 5 years. Just check the space, keep checking in with them and see how the project comes along. For the time that you're looking at, the 1830s, I think what I would suggest to you is looking at the Valuation Office records. These cover the time frame 1830 to 1865 in Ireland. They encompass 2 million Irish households in that critical generation before, during and immediately after the famine. So I think there's a very strong probability that you're going to find what you're looking for there. You mentioned, Susan, the tithe allotment books. The tithe allotment books, in my experience, has very limited coverage. There's no coverage of urban households, and having done comparative studies looking at estate records with TAB, the tithe books, I've actually found that coverage of the tithe allotment books can actually fall as low as 35% in some districts. Now contrast that with the Valuation Office records, which again, doing similar kind of comparative studies looking at estate records and comparing them against the source at hand, the Valuation Office records, you'd actually find there's very often there's 100% complete coverage of all households in every parish. This is especially good for the countryside. So, Susan, I think that would be my first recommendation to you, to look for the Valuation Office records, and they're published exclusively on the Findmypast website. Okay, Kim Billy Thompson is looking for her third great-grandmother, Hannah or Joanna Fox, born in Cork about 1809 to 12. and she asks, is there any way of finding out who her parents were? And she asks, is there a possibility that she simply may not have been baptized? Because Kim has had very little success in tracing any record for Hannah, any baptismal record for Hannah. The first thing I would say is, do you have a marriage record for Hannah? A marriage record in England or Ireland, or in the US, in fact, a marriage record anywhere should actually give the name of the bride and the groom's fathers. It should also indicate what their occupation is and whether or not they were still alive at the time their child was married. So that would be the first thing, to look for Hannah's father's name on her civil or church marriage record. Now, failing this, it might still be possible to track down information about Hannah or Joanna's father. Look at the naming pattern of her children. There's a really strong naming pattern in Irish families, among Irish families, and this actually you'll find it across the board. People of every faith tradition, of all social backgrounds. The eldest son is normally named after his paternal grandfather, the second son after his maternal grandfather, and the third son after his father, if that name, of course, hasn't already been used. So even if you can't find a marriage record for Hannah, what you could potentially do is to try and discern what the father's names may be by looking at the naming pattern among her children. Then once you have Hannah's name, Hannah Fox, once you have her approximate year of birth, 1809, 10, 11, 12, and her father's name, that should be enough evidence to track down where the family are. Remember that all of the baptismal records that are available online are indexed, and the index is not the original record. So if you can find a family that fits the father's name that is having children at the correct time, I would then suggest that you switch your search to do what I refer to as a fingertip search of the original parish registers. And Kim, just in preparing this, I took a quick look myself, and I actually found there is a Fox family. In fact, there's two Fox families in Cork South Parish in Cork City in the first 2 decades of the 1800s. So I would give that a closer look, and you'll find those Catholic baptismal and marriage records, the parish records collection, online on the Find My Past website. Okay, a different kind of question now. Onyini Thomas writes, I've been trying to find out more about my third great-grandmother's family. Her surname changes many times in Wales, but from DNA matches and some extra snooping, I know her name was Bridget Hankard, Hankard. Her father's name was John Hankard, and he was a husbandman, according to her marriage certificate in 1855. From census records, it seems she was born around 1834 in Ireland. Anya goes on to write, Hankard is a common name in the Cork area, and she asks, is there a way I can pinpoint my John Hankard, try and find out who his wife was, and how he relates to these other people that she has actually tracked down through DNA. So Anya, there's two parts to your question. Let's try and answer the first part of the question, looking for a baptismal record for Bridget Hankard. Well, it would be quite young for Bridget to have emigrated by the age of 21 to Wales by herself without any other family present. And if she was born in 1834 and marries in Wales in 1855, that would suggest that she was 21, which I think is a little bit young for a young woman to be living in a different country on her own without relatives around her. So this is the first thing. Now, I searched and I found a baptismal record for a Bridget Hankard, the daughter of John Hankard and Mary Fenton, and she was born 9th of May 1824 in Cloyne Parish. So that would actually make her almost 10 years older than the Bridget, 10 years older than the age that Bridget, your great times 3 grandmother, gives in her 1855 marriage record. But in a sense, This is part of the reason. This is part of the reason why I suggested that 21 might be too young for Bridget to have emigrated on her own. I would be inclined to think that Bridget probably was a little bit older, more likely in her late 20s or even early 30s, by the time she was living and marrying in Wales. So that's my first thing. I'm a woman, I'm a feminist, but it is a common thing that we see when we look at historic records. We see women very often dropping a number of years off their age. Just call it ordinary vanity. It strikes us all. Um, and possibly it could be that Bridget wanted to even up the age, or maybe even make herself appear a little bit, a couple of years younger than her husband. So that's the first part of the question. I do think that Bridget Hankard, daughter of John Hankard and Mary Fenton, 1824 in Cloyne Parish, could be your girl. The second thing that you asked was about trying to find out more, to pinpoint John Hankard, who the wife, who he was married to, and how he related to these others. Well, I think what you need to do is look at the church parish registers to try and trace his wife. If my hunch is correct, albeit on very slim, a very short focus of research, I think she's probably Mary Fenton. If you look at the parish registers, you can look at all other children born to the same couple, and you can then begin to work it up by searching things like valuation office records, Griffith's valuation, to look and see what kind of landholding they have, the number of acres. Look at the house books and the valuation to try and find the dimensions of the house they live in, and if there are any out offices. So it's actually usually possible to say really solid, concrete things about the living conditions and the kind of farming that your ancestor may have done using the valuation office records. Now I'm going to pause for a moment and just check and see who has joined us. I see Rita McClellan from Cherry Hill in New Jersey. Welcome, Rita. And Angela Hitchcock from Kent. Some people are commenting on the sound. I have turned the sound up and I have adjusted my headset. And can you please tell me if the sound is any better now? Melody Burke is joining us today from Maryland in the US. Linda Devi too, although she doesn't say where she is. Trish Kelly, a good Irish name, is joining us from Somerset. And John Romain from Vancouver in Canada. It must be early where you are, John. Sue Kelly. And Sue asks, will the Church of Ireland digitise the vestry books too? That hasn't been announced. The RCBL has been very close about how they intend to digitise the collections that they have. They haven't taken any advice from the people who are most experienced at digitising the records. So we have no concrete evidence about what it is they're going to do. I think it's a matter of sitting back and waiting to find out. Or you could try and email them and write. Let's see who else is there. Frankie Harris is joining us from Cornwall. Frankie writes that they are researching in Monaghan. Well, good luck to you there, Frankie. I have Monaghan ancestry too, and at times I think Monaghan is a bit of a genealogical black hole. Tess Martin, hello, great. Tess says the sound is good. Rosie Merrill is on a headset. She said the sound is good. Pat Bowles says okay, the sound is okay, and so does Judith the Sage. Sue Kelly likewise says the volume is fine here, all fine here. Judy Kett says hello from Norfolk, researching the Collins family from Cork who settled in Bristol. Collins is one of those names that you will find in Cork. Throw a stone in Cork and you're going to hit a Collins. There's a huge amount of connection as well between Cork, which was a big port city, and a lot of the port cities along the coast. So Bristol and Liverpool, all the way up the west coast. Rick Oxley is joining us from the beach in Naples. Nice one. Tess Martin. Hello, Tess. Good to have you here. Lorna Marion, Pat Bowles, and Opal Ann Taylor is joining us from Florida. Sue Kelly has a relative immigrated age 18 to the US on her own. Sue, if you look at the ship's manifest, you might actually find that she didn't in fact emigrate on her own, but that there could be a sibling, or there could be another family member, or even a cousin who actually took the ship with her. Let's see, who else? Diane Mullen. How common is it for a father and son to go to the US, to leave the son, and the father goes back to Ireland? That certainly is possible. It's something we see where people establish almost a beachhead. They establish themselves in a house or on a piece of land, and then perhaps the father goes back to close off all business interests, leases or similar in Ireland, and to collect the rest of the family and bring them back to Ireland. So where a family didn't have all the money for everyone to emigrate together, very often you might see that. You might see a father and one or two of the elder children going across together, finding and establishing a place where they can settle, and then returning to Ireland to collect the remainder of the family. Let's take a look at some of the other questions that have come into us in this last week. Denise Phillips writes, can you find any information on my grandmother, Mary Ann Tully, born about March 1905 in Dublin? Well, Denise, if she's born in 1905, her civil birth record is almost certain to be not only captured, but to be published online on the free genealogy website, irishgenealogy.ie. So take a look there for Mary or Mary Ann Tully, born in Dublin in March 1905. I took an earlier look today. I actually found a number of possible candidates. I'm sure that, Denise, you have more information about your grandmother, so that you can actually pick out which one is the correct Mary Ann from her doppelgangers, women who had the same name, who were born around the same time in the same place. Dina Friggle asks, are there records for orphan Irish children sent back to Ireland from the UK? There certainly are, Dina. Now, you didn't give a decade when it happened, so I'm going to answer this in a very broad sense. There are records of the English poor law unions who returned the Irish poor who turned up on their parish doorstep. Every parish, of course, was responsible for its own poor law. So if it found that these were people who had migrated in and settled and who weren't originally from there, they could always ask the parish for money to actually resettle people. And in fact, you do find many of the Irish poor, including children and orphans, being returned into Ireland. The difficulty is these records are very scattered. Findmypast has made a really, really good start at collecting and digitizing these records. And so, for example, you'll find records of Lincolnshire poor law removals from 1665, a really early start date, continuing up until 1885, and Wiltshire removal orders from 1670 to 1890. To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't really been an attempt to collate all of the records of all of the different poor laws. With one exception, I know that Ancestry has national records for England from 1859 to 60. But in a sense, you're catching 2 years, and otherwise you have to go back to the county of settlement in England, and then you might find the records of an Irish family or of Irish children and orphans being returned to Ireland. Hello to Michelle Wagner-Howard joining us from Graham, Washington. And Sue Pooley Eliezer is joining us from South Carolina. Sue, you must be enjoying summer. I wonder if you've actually hit the summer highs yet. Anne Hasty is joining us from Scotland. Cindy Pennington is joining us from the Aberdeenshire coast, and Vivian Cully-Weller from Boston. Okay, let's take another question. Pat Smith asks, why would a family change its name from O'Sullivan to Sullivan? Well, Pat, quite simply, this was a way of assimilating into English culture. Ireland was a country that had its own language, and after the three successive conquests, the Tudor conquest in the 16th century, the Confederate conquests under Cromwell in the 1640s, and the Williamite conquest in the 1690s, there was a project undertaken to assimilate the Irish people and to bring them into English culture. And one of the simple ways in which Irish people could assimilate was by dropping the O's and the Mac's from their name. Now, there's something of an urban myth that a law was passed outlawing the use of O and Mac, and this took such a strong hold that in the 1890s they even sent a parliamentary researcher to search the rolls of the English Parliament to try and find the original statute. And it was only after 6 months they realised they'd been had, and that no such law had ever been passed. It was simply a convention. It was a custom that had grown up. A simple way of assimilating was to drop the O and the Mac from your name. Very many Irish families in the late 19th century and early 20th century, at the time of what we call the Celtic cultural revival here in Ireland, when people began to learn the Irish language again. At that time, very many people put the O's and Mac's back into their names. So it's not uncommon to see a family recorded as Sullivan in the mid-19th century, and for that same family to return themselves with an O, very proudly wielding their O's 50 years later. So I hope that answers your question, Pat. Okay, Kieran Mooney says, I have Irish Catholic records showing my 4 times great-granddad as Eyre Kenny, E-Y-R-E. But when he came to England in the 1870s, the records show his name as William Kenny. Now Kieran writes, I once read that heir meant the heir to something, the heir of an estate, but I haven't been able to find anything else relating to it. Well, I think actually in this case, Kieran, Eyre is in fact a name. The Eyre family were an Anglo-Irish landed family, and they settled along the west coast. Now, it seems what you have here is one of two things. It's either a double-barrel name, or it could actually be a mother's maiden name being used as the child's Christian name to signal the family connection to the community. So, if you search the records on Findmypast using Eyre Kenny, you'll find 84 separate records, most of which correspond to the time frame in which you show that your grandfather was born. If he came to England in the 1870s, I'm presuming he was born possibly 30 years earlier. And in fact, I found over 80 records for an Eyre Kenny born in or around the 1840s, plus or minus 10 years, and continuing in Ireland until the 1870s, at which time you say he relocates to the United Kingdom. Okay, Christine McSorley is joining us from Ontario, and Christine writes, I'm researching Jones' ancestors on Anglesey, North Wales. What a nightmare. I think looking for a Jones in Anglesey certainly would. Leslie Carney is looking for the Levy, a Jewish surname, in the East End of London in the early part of the 19th century. Diane Mullen is searching for Mullins from Strabane. In Ireland we tend to get a lot of regional names. You get clusters of names in particular districts, and Mullen would be one of those names in Strabane. So is the name Toohey in the Castle Connell area of Limerick. Let's see. Cindy Pennington is researching Doherty and Malley, with only Ireland as a birthplace. She's looking for something to go on. Cindy, if you can find your Dohertys in Glasgow and your Malleys in Edinburgh, if you can find a civil birth record, a civil marriage record for those Dohertys and Edinburghs, it should give the name of the person's father. I believe Scottish marriage records, in fact, give the names of both parents. Now, once you have that evidence, it should be enough to return to the Irish baptismal records and to search for a baptismal record for your Doherty and Gallagher ancestors who emigrated and who settled in Scotland. So I think you're in a very good starting place, and there's a very strong probability that you are going to find the family. The church parish registers, the Catholic parish registers for all 32 counties in Ireland are digitised. They're available on the Findmypast website. I see that somebody's recommending that you go to the Irish genealogy website, but the Irish genealogy website only has Dublin and Cork City, West Cork and County Kerry. So in fact, you would be limiting yourself. You're almost certainly not going to find it in Irish genealogy, whereas there is a strong possibility you'll find it in the Catholic parish collection on Findmypast. Okay, let's look at another question. Grace Pauline Briggs Morris. A deep breath. I would like to find out my grandfather's past. He was from County Down. I think his name was Ferris. He changed it to Ferris when he came to England. He lived in Newcastle. Well, Grace, I searched the Findmypast website using the Ferris surname, searching exclusively in County Down, and I found there's over 300 records from 1822 to 1921, and these include church records, civil records of births, marriages and deaths, land tax records, and the 1901 and 1911 census. Now, as you didn't give us forename for your grandfather, I couldn't actually dig in. I couldn't actually start to look for a record that was relevant to him. But there is plenty of evidence for you to work from. So get to it, Grace, and let us know how you get on. Patty Jacks writes, my second great-grandmother was a Mulcahy, according to her obituary. Her obituary states she was born in Cincinnati. I believe I found her parents, writes Patty, but my great-uncle shows very few Mulcahy matches. She writes, I wonder if I would have better luck testing myself with another DNA company. If so, is there a good source for Ireland matches? Well, Patty, most DNA companies allow you to download your own results, and some of them allow you to upload to other sites. So that, in fact, is something I'd strongly recommend you do. At the beginning of the lockdown, when I had a little bit of time in my hands, I did precisely that. I downloaded my results from one website and I uploaded it to a number of others. Remember as well to always link your DNA with GEDCOM, because that way if you make a connection, the person who you've made the connection with can actually view your family tree and can work out where it is on the tree they probably connect. And it's a real way of encouraging people to make that, to link up with you and to try and establish that common link on the family tree. On to Barbara Williams. Barbara writes, my great-great-grandfather, William Brown, says in his marriage certificate, his father is a clergyman called Samuel Brown, and each census shows William as having been born in Dublin. Barbara writes, I tried a few things, but I can't find his father. Well, Barbara, most Church of Ireland clergymen were usually educated in Trinity College before they were ordained. So if he's a Church of Ireland clergyman, I would start by looking at the Trinity College alumni lists, which are available on the Findmypast website. You can follow through on this by looking at, that should give you a name, that should give you a record of Samuel Brown, when he entered the college, the name of his father's occupation, that kind of good solid detail. It should also be possible to look at a printed source, printed in the form of a book. The Leslie Clergy Succession Lists give the names and a short biography of every clergyman from the 16th century down to the 20th century. The Leslie Clergy Succession Lists. These are given by diocese. So if you actually find not only that Samuel Brown but also his son William Brown were educated in Trinity College, it should be possible to get some sense of what county they are in, and from that to work back and to identify the diocese, and then to find the exact book. Now those clergy succession lists for Church of Ireland clergy are published by diocese as books, and they're published by the Ulster Historical Foundation. So you can go online and look to see. First of all, use the records and Findmypast to pin down which county and from that which diocese, but then you can actually reverse engineer to order in the diocese. Okay, Ray Smith asks, does the term nurse child have a particular meaning in Ireland? And Ray is asking this because he has found it on the census. Well, Ray, it certainly does. A nurse child is a child who has been separated from its birth parents, but in particular from its birth mother, and it's come into the care of the state, usually through the workhouse system. And the workhouse has then put the child out to nurse. In other words, it's actually paying foster parents to care for this child. It's one of the most common things that we see in census, where there is an infant or a young person who's not from that family. It's one of the most common ways we explain how there is somebody from outside the family living in the household. So always look out for that. A nurse child, or sometimes a foster child is another phrase that you will actually find in the census. Okay, let's look to another one. Nicole Hassel writes, my question is my 4 times great-grandparents came from Ireland. I'm struggling to find them in Ireland before they come to the UK. Their names are Francis Duffy and Margaret Alexander, and they settled in Liverpool in the 1840s. How can I find out where in Ireland they come from? Nicole writes, I simply have their father's name in the marriage ban, and that's it. I have nothing else on them. Any help? Thanks. Well, Nicole, the good news is that's all you actually need to search. You need the name of the person, which you have in this case, Francis Duffy and Margaret Alexander. If you have them in the UK census, it should be possible to calculate their approximate year of birth. And you have the names of their fathers from their marriage records. Now, using these 3 pieces of corroborative evidence, the name of the person, the approximate year of birth, and the name of the father, you can search the baptismal records, which are available online on the Findmypast website. I would search for the baptism of both Francis Duffy and Margaret Alexander. But I would also search for all other children of these names, all other children with this family name. So Duffy's born to a father of that name in the decade in which Francis is born in Ireland, if you actually scan. If you could find a baptismal record for your great grandparents, you'll then have the mother's maiden name, and you can extend out the search using the church, the baptismal and the marriage records. So in fact, I think you have all the information that you need to actually reach back into the Irish records and to begin working with those. Okay, Kerry Smith writes, I'm researching my husband's family tree. So, Kerry, does that mean that you ran out of your own family stories and you had to actually reach into your husband's? So you could actually get your fix of genealogy and family history fun. You're right, I've recently purchased his great-grandmother's death certificate. It states she was born on the 2nd of the 4th, 1885, in the Irish Republic. Her name was Kathleen Cummings. I'm pretty sure her marriage certificate states her father as being John Cummings. She's not sure when they came across to England. She can't find them on the census until she's Kathleen Beely and living in Rotherham. And she writes, she has tried looking in the passenger transcripts. She can't find anything on birth registers. Her mother-in-law seems to think they are coming from County Mayo. Any help would be appreciated. Um, Kerry, there won't be any passenger lists kept between Ireland and Britain for the simple reason that this would have been understood as internal travel right up until 1922, at which time Ireland gains its independence. And even after that, the connection between the two countries was such that passenger lists of people travelling to and from each country were simply never kept, unfortunately. There are, however, passenger lists from 1890 onwards, and these were kept by the Board of Trade from 1890 right up until 1960. And these, of course, include everyone sailing from an Irish port from 1890 until 1922. So you could possibly go back and take a look at these. I also went back and I looked at the irishgenealogy.ie website. Um, you have the date of birth that you think she was born on. I think perhaps you need to go back and look at these records again, but this time allow for the fact that there could be a slight variant in the spelling. So don't just search for Cummings, Cummings. Also look for Commons, and look also for variants in the forename. So look for Kate or Katie or Kathleen alongside Catherine. Given the time that you're searching, there is a record almost certainly there. You just need to focus in. You need to be able to gather enough to have enough corroborative evidence together to be quite sure that you have the correct Catherine Cummings, and you are not looking at a doppelganger, somebody who has the same name and who lives around the same time frame. Okay, let's see who else is there. Right, there's some questions back and forwards here between the lot of you. Kelly MacDonald is searching for her great-great-grandfather, Thomas MacDonald, born illegitimate in 1855 to Thomas MacDonald and Jane Malloy. The parents never married, but she's found records for marriage to somebody else, a dozen kids, and a death record. Kelly, you don't actually give an actual question, so I'm just going to leave it there and move on. Opalan Taylor writes, it is hot in Florida. She's looking for a Harris coming from an island named Harris and a Cleland from South Carolina. Okay, Harris is one of those names. It almost certainly is a patronym. Harris would probably be the son of a Harry at some point. There is some possibility it might also be the name of a name taken from a place. It could be the island of Harris, except for the fact that Harris is found everywhere: England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. It's found in Ireland even before we have even before we have a lot of English settlement. So I don't think you can necessarily take a place name as being indicative, the island of Harris as being indicative of the possible place of origin. Cleland is, to the best of my knowledge, McClelland. That's certainly a name that occurs here in Ireland. Opalan, I think what you need to do is you need to do what we call reverse genealogy. Use the records in the United States to try and focus in, build up a profile on the family after they settle in the US. Try and trace the immigrant ancestor. Get things like a marriage record to try and see if you can trace his father's name. Once you have a father's name, that may be sufficient evidence to reach back into the Irish records, so that rather than just collecting the names of 100 Clellans or McClellans, you're actually identifying the person, the correct baptismal record or land record. So it's always key to try and build up as clear a picture as you can from the records that are available to you. Okay, Opal, I hope that's good advice. Let's take a move. Let's take another question. Amy McGovern writes, When you have ancestors that go between Dublin and Liverpool, how do you narrow down which country to look in, especially when so many were displaced during the potato famine? In a sense, Amy, you've hit the nail on the head. Dublin and Liverpool were both ports of transit, so you have no way of knowing whether or not that was their original place of origin, Dublin, or whether they arrived in Dublin on the journey to Liverpool. I think if you can find records of these people in the 1840s and 50s, I'm presuming that's the time you're looking because you mentioned the famine. I think what you might be able to do is to look for a marriage record which might give your ancestor's father's name on it. And also identify your ancestor in the UK in a census to try and pin down the approximate year of birth. Once you have that evidence, somebody's full name, the name of their father, and their approximate year of birth, it should be enough corroborative evidence to reach back into the Irish records and to correctly identify a baptismal record for that person. Once you can identify a baptismal record, you can begin to work up the story, finding good evidence on the names of the parents, including the mother's maiden name, any other siblings born to the same family, to find the house, the homestead, where it was they lived, whether in a town, a village, or in the countryside. And there are excellent records from the 1830s onwards that will allow you to really build up a good picture of the family, the kind of their lived experience. And this is what we always strive for with family history. We're trying to move past the stamp collecting of genealogy, where people just collect a birth, a baptism, a marriage record, or a burial. We're trying to actually rebuild, say something about the story, the narrative of that family, and what their lived experience was like. Okay, Wynne Doyle says, is there any way to find ancestors in Tulsk in County Roscommon before 1864, as all parish registers were destroyed in a church fire? She says, thank you. Okay, Tulsk, County Roscommon. If you are looking before 1864, then Wynne, I would actually focus on the Valuation Office Records Collection and Griffith's Valuation. This covers the time frame of 1830 to 1867. There is good coverage of households in towns and villages, but the Valuation Office records, including Griffith's valuation, give us 100% complete coverage of all households in rural areas. If you reach into the Valuation Office records, you'll also find subsets. The house books will give you evidence about the dimensions of the house that your ancestors lived in, how high it was, if it was single story or double story, how long it was, the breadth. They will tell you if there are any outbuildings or offices which may have been used as a workshop or may have been used in farming. The field books will tell you an awful lot about the landholding. If your family are from the land, were farmers or smallholders or cottiers who were paid for their labour by a holding of a couple of acres, you will still find evidence of them in the tenure books, which is a subset of the Valuation Office collection. So this is the best advice I can give you, is to focus in on these records which are published exclusively on the Find My Past website. Liz Hall writes, my great-grandmother was Fanny Fitzsimons, born in Navan, County Meath, so Liz, we could be related. She's found the record of her baptism, but has been unable to find any record of her husband, Henry Trodden, who also claims to have been born in Navan about 1844. Well, Liz, I searched on the Find My Past website. I simply keyed in the name Henry Trodden, because it's an unusual name in an Irish context. I found a number of records which are relevant for your great-grandfather. He was, in fact, almost certainly born in 1844 in Navan in County Meath. That's what he gives as his birthplace in 1866 when he is a prisoner in Kilmainham and Richmond jail, and he's being held for treasonable practice. Not only that, but when I looked at the original jail register, I found that Henry Trodden was sent on board a ship to England accompanied by detectives under the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act. In other words, you could arrest somebody on suspicion of having committed a crime. Now, the fact that he is arrested under the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act and that he's being held for treasonable practices tells me that Henry Trodden, your great-grandfather, was in fact a Fenian. So there's a great story here, and there are plenty of leads to follow up. The best lead I can advise you is there's more than 2,000 photographs of the Fenian prisoners who were captured in 1866 and 1867 in Ireland. This collection is held in the National Archives of Ireland. So I would strongly recommend that you take a look at their website and see. You can get evidence about that collection, and you may in fact want to search it much more closely, because there's a very, very strong probability that you will in fact be able to trace a photograph of your great-grandfather Henry Trodden in the 1860s as a Fenian prisoner. So that's a great story, Liz. Sue Taylor writes, my husband's great-great-grandfather Nicholas Traynor was born in County Cavan in 1805. In the Knockbridge, Ballyborough area. She can't find his baptism and therefore his parents' names or details of his marriage to Mary Clark. Well, Sue, that may simply be because the Knockbride Catholic baptismal register only starts in 1835, so you're not going to find a baptism for somebody born 30 years earlier. However, there's a strong possibility that you will find his marriage record. The marriage registers also start in 1835. So I'd recommend that you start by looking at the Knockbride marriage registers. You may also have better success using the land records, because Sue, the simple reality of it all is that land is very often better documented than are people, funnily enough. Mary Jones writes, I'm looking for my great-grandfather, Patrick Crompton, born in Killycreen in Cleanish Parish in Fermanagh in January 1856. He immigrated to the Cape in South Africa. He was one of several Irish foresters recruited there. Mary has been contacted by an author who's writing a book on the early Irish foresters at the Cape. Well, Mary, I looked and I found evidence of the Harron family living in Killycreen East, in the Landed Estates Court Rentals on Findmypast. The family are still there in 1871 and in 1876. Patrick Harron, the father, is leasing 48 acres on an annual lease, for which he pays a rent of £13, 18 shillings and 4pence. On the adjoining site, I found a Hugh Harron. He's living alongside Patrick, so he's probably a father, a brother, or a cousin, but a close connection, living side by side in the same townland, and he has a similar sized holding. There's valuable timber on the plot, and in fact there's a description of this source, the LEC Rentals, Landed Estate Court Rentals, and again these are one of the exclusive sources which are found only on the Findmypast website. You know where he is. You can reach into the parish registers and search for a baptismal record for your great-grandfather, Patrick Crampton Harron. Once you have that, you can search for any other siblings born to the same parents, and in that way you can start to build up a picture of the family, the number of children in the family. Using the LEC, you get a description of the size of their holding, the amount of rent they paid, the kind of tenure that they actually had. Annual tenure, so it's not as secure as a lease for lives, for example, but it's still good, and the description tells us that it's close to the river, that there is valuable hardwood timber on the site. So it would seem that being a forester was something which he didn't lick it from the stones, and it was something which he probably had some experience in, some training in, before he actually was recruited to go across to South Africa. We're coming to the end now, so I want to quickly race through a number of questions. Sarah Mac Stravic, is looking for the MacStravic name in County Antrim. Sarah, there are hundreds of MacStravics, baptismal records and marriage records in County Antrim on the Irish Roots website. Now this is a name that lends itself to variant spellings, so keep a close eye on names which are similar. Always click the little text box underneath the name to make sure that you're getting all variant spellings. It allows you to cast your net as widely as possible as you go about your search. Fiona Shepherd is searching for her great-great-grandfather, William Mullen. He worked in the Eneclann estate in Kilwinning in Scotland, and Fiona has visited Irvine to search the census for further information. She'd like to know if he may have been brought across by the Montgomery family, who were the landlords, who brought William Mullen and his wife across from their property in Northern Ireland. His date of birth is approximately 1825. Well, Fiona, starting point is, it seems very unlikely that William Mullen only emigrated in his late 50s to Scotland. So the very first thing is, I would double check earlier census records and see if I can find evidence of William Mullen and his family living in Scotland prior to the 1850s. It was in fact a regular occurrence for a landlord to allow a good tenant to move from an estate, from a holding on one estate to another. We see in this way tenants passing backward and forwards from Ireland to Scotland or England. And in fact, in one of the Who Do You Think You Are's for Graham Norton, we actually traced Graham's ancestral family. We found that in fact they moved from an estate in Yorkshire in the 1720s and were settled. They were resettled on the landlord's estate in County Wicklow in Ireland. So this is something we see all the time, that where families own, where a landlord has a large estate in both Great Britain and in Ireland, that they may move tenants from one estate to the other. You are going to have to parse the estate records to try and search through them and see if you can find evidence in letters books or similar of arrangements made by the landlord. Okay, last couple of questions. Margaret Bartley writes, my grandfather was Gerald Roach, born 23rd of September 1876, Father Patrick Roach in Cork. He died in Jenkinstown in Kilkenny. He committed suicide in September 1922. He was a land steward at Gowran Castle. Now Margaret is trying to find his birth certificate and his grave and also the coroner's report. She writes, his death was reported in the newspapers. I really hope you can help me. So I looked and I noted that there is a coroner's report. There's evidence of a coroner's report being completed on his civil death record. Now, all coroner's records have been accessioned to the National Archives of Ireland. So, in fact, this is where you're going to find a record of Gerald Roach's, of the inquest into his suicide. So, once the archives are open, and I understand that I have seen the shutters on the National Archives open earlier this week, although I haven't seen anybody going in yet, although it's just around the corner from my own office. So it may be possible to actually get a record of the inquest for Gerald Roach in 1922 for Jenkinstown in Kilkenny. Can I also advise you, Margaret, to possibly look for, you say his name is Gerald Roach. I searched and I found a civil birth record for a Garrett Roach, the son of Patrick Roach and Anne Landis, born in Fermoy Union Workhouse in 1876. Now this is one of the things that sometimes throws people off the scent. Garrett is it's an anglicised version of an Irish name. So the name Gerald has been Gaelicised to Geroid, and then it's been passed back into English as Garrett. But in fact, Garrett and Gerald are versions of the same name. So I think that this Garrett Roach seems to match up pretty well in terms of the date of birth, the place of birth in Cork, and the father's name. So I would strongly recommend that you take a look at that. I'm going to finish with one last question coming in from Christine Sampson. And we started a little bit late because we lost the early connection, so I'm just going to finish up with this one. Christine writes, Fiona, my great-great-grandfather Robert McMurray married Anne Gordon at the Meeting House in Baileyborough, County Cavan in 1856. His father on the marriage certificate is Robert McMurray, a labourer. And she has found the baptism for Robert's brother in Shercock in County Cavan in 1829. She asks, what would be my next step in trying to get further back? I took a look at this. The couple married in the Presbyterian Meeting House, so we're looking for Presbyterian records which have not been digitised and published online to date. Now, at the time of marriage, the groom gives an address of Culleys, and I looked at Culleys and I found that it's a townland in County Cavan. The corresponding Presbyterian church are coronary, funnily enough, coronary, like a heart attack. And the baptismal records start very early in 1764, and marriages for this church start in 1768. So Christine, this is my advice for you. The records are held in the PRONI, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast. So take a trip to Belfast to view these Presbyterian church records for coronary and see whether or not you can actually trace baptismal records for your great-great-grandfather Robert McMurray, and possibly a marriage record for his parents as well. Okay, do I have time for one last? I just about do. Mabel Dennison writes, Fiona, I would like if you could tell me anything about my granddad McLaughlin. He was born in Moville in 1893. His father's name was Winks, W-I-N-K-S. Winks, the father, was from the US. My granddad McLaughlin was adopted because his father didn't want him. His mother died in childbirth in Ireland. Well, sometimes when we look back, the past is a much harsher place than the world we inhabit today. I took a look at the records on irishgenealogy.ie, and sure enough I found a record of a William Winks, born 23rd of October 1893 in Moville. His father's name was given as Charles Winks of Wilmington in Pennsylvania, USA, and his occupation was a Morocco dresser. It's a lovely occupation to have. A Morocco dresser would quite literally have been somebody who did the fancy leather carving, the tool work in leather for reins or for a fancy saddle or a handbag. So it's quite a skilled but quite a specific skill set. William's mother was given as Mary Winks, maiden name MacDonald, and the informant on the civil birth was Susan McLaughlin, presumably the midwife who was present at the birth. Now this child, William McLaughlin, age 7, is present in the household of Neil and Susan McLaughlin of Moville in the 1901 census. So here we can see the child, the midwife who actually delivered the child, appears to have taken the child on, to have adopted the child and given him the name of McLaughlin. But here we can see a direct connection between Winks and between the William Winks born on 23rd of October 1893 and the William McLaughlin. Now if you want to actually copper fasten this a little bit more, I'd strongly recommend that you go to the Donegal Workhouse records, which are available exclusively on the Find My Past website, because all arrangements for nurse children, for children who were foundlings or who were boarded out, were made through the workhouse at board level. So if you look at the Poor Law Union minutes for the Donegal Workhouse, you will almost certainly see a record of the arrangement by which William Winks is boarded out, is fostered with the McLaughlin family. Now, I'm going to have to finish there. We have finished exactly 60 minutes after we started. So thank you very much. I've been a bit of a motor mouth today. Thank you to everyone who has joined me. We've managed to answer 25 questions in the time. If you didn't get a question answered today, my apologies. I will pass them back to the Findmypast team, and I'm sure they will include them in a future session, a future Q&A session of this kind. So thank you very much to everyone who has joined us today from all around the world. And thank you for sending in some really quite interesting questions with good information that I could really get my teeth into.
Thank you from Findmypast as well, Fiona, for being here. It's fantastically useful for everybody. So I think I speak on behalf of everybody who's joined the session to say thank you for your time and your expertise. And we look forward to hearing you again.
Thanks, Brian. It's been fun doing that this afternoon. It's a rainy day in Dublin. I see that some of you are discussing the rain in the different countries you live in. So, to quote the words of the old song, feels like it's raining all over the world on an afternoon like this. Thanks very much, and good night, or good evening even.